Section 10 of History of Egypt, Volume 2, by Gaston Maspero. read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 1. The Political Constitution of Egypt, Part 10. The festivals of the living gods attracted considerable crowds, who came not only from the nearest nomes, but also from great distances in caravans and in boats laden with merchandise, for religious sentiment did not exclude commercial interests, and the pilgrimage ended in a fair. For several days, the people occupied, mentioned by Herodotus. The religious ceremony was accompanied by a general illumination which lasted all the night. The object of this, probably, was to facilitate the visit which the souls of the dead were supposed to pay at this time to the family residents themselves solely in prayers, sacrifices, and processions, in which the faithful, clad in white, with palms in their hands, chanted hymns as they escorted the priests on their way. The gods of heaven exclaim, "Ah! Ah!" in satisfaction; the inhabitants of the earth are full of gladness; the Hathors beat their tabors; the great ladies wave their mystic whips; all those who are gathered together in the town are drunk with wine and crowned with flowers; the tradespeople of the place walk joyously about, their heads scented with perfumed oils; all the children rejoice in honor of the goddess, from the rising to the setting of the sun. The nights were as noisy as the days; for a few hours they made up energetically for long months of torpor and monotonous existence. The god having re entered the temple and the pilgrims taken their departure, the regular routine was resumed and dragged on its tedious course, interrupted only by the weekly market. At an early hour on that day, the peasant folk came in from the surrounding country in an interminable stream, and installed themselves in some open space, reserved from time immemorial for their use. The sheep, geese, goats, and large horned cattle were grouped in the centre, awaiting purchasers. Market gardeners, fishermen, fowlers and gazelle hunters, potters and small tradesmen, squatted on roadsides or against the houses, and offered their wares for the inspection of their customers, heaped up in reed baskets or piled on low round tables, vegetables and fruits, loaves or cakes baked in the night, meat either raw or cooked in various ways, stuffs, perfumes, ornaments, all the necessities and luxuries of daily life. It was a good opportunity for the work people, as well as for the townsfolk, to lay in a store of provisions at a cheaper rate than from the ordinary shops, and they took advantage of it, each according to his means. Business was mostly carried on by barter. The purchasers brought with them the product of their toil, a new tool, a pair of shoes, a reed mat, pots of unguents or cordials, often, too, rows of cowries and a small box full of rings, each weighing a tabnu, made of copper, silver, or even gold, all destined to be bartered for such things as they needed. When it came to be a question of some large animal or of objects of considerable value, the discussions which arose were keen and stormy. It was necessary to be agreed not only as to the amount, but as to the nature of the payment to be made, and to draw up a sort of invoice, or in fact an inventory, in which beds, sticks, honey, oil, pickaxes, and garments all figure as equivalents for a bull or a she-ass. Smaller retail bargains did not demand so many or such complicated calculations. Two townsfolk stop for a moment in front of a fellah who offers onions and corn in a basket for sale. The first appears to possess no other circulating medium than two necklaces made of glass beads or many-coloured enamelled terracotta; the other flourishes about a circular fan with a wooden handle, and one of those triangular contrivances used by cooks for blowing up the fire. "Here is a fine necklace which will suit you," cries the former; "it is just what you are wanting," while the other breaks in with, "Here is a fan and a ventilator." The fellah, however, does not let himself be disconcerted by this double attack, and proceeding methodically, he takes one of the necklaces to examine it at his leisure. "Give it to me to look at, that I may fix the price." The one asks too much, the other offers too little. After many concessions they at last come to an agreement, and settle on the number of onions or the quantity of grain which corresponds exactly with the value of the necklace or the fan. A little further on, a customer wishes to get some perfumes in exchange for a pair of sandals, and conscientiously praises his wares. "Here," says he, "is a strong pair of shoes." But the merchant has no wish to be shod just then, and demands a row of cowries for his little pots. "You have merely to take a few drops of this to see how delicious it is," he urges in a persuasive tone. A seated customer has two jars thrust under his nose by a woman. They probably contain some kind of unguent. Here is something which smells good enough to tempt you. Behind this group two men are discussing the relative merits of a bracelet and a bundle of fish hooks. A woman, with a small box in her hand, is having an argument with a merchant selling necklaces. Another woman seeks to obtain a reduction in the price of a fish which is being scraped in front of her. Exchanging commodities for metal necessitated 2 or 3 operations not required in ordinary barter. The rings or thin bent strips of metal which formed the tabnu and its multiples, did not always contain the regulation amount of gold or silver, and were often of light weight. They had to be weighed at every fresh transaction in order to estimate their true value, and the interested parties never missed this excellent opportunity for a heated discussion. After having declared for a quarter of an hour that the scales were out of order, that the weighing had been carelessly performed, and that it should be done over again, they at last came to terms, exhausted with wrangling, and then went their way fairly satisfied with one another. It sometimes happened that a clever and unscrupulous dealer would alloy the rings, and mix with the precious metal as much of a baser sort as would be possible without danger of detection. The honest merchant who thought he was receiving in payment for some article, say 8 tabnu of fine gold, and who had handed to him 8 tabnu of some alloy resembling gold, but containing 1/3 of silver, lost, in a single transaction, without suspecting it, almost 1/3 of his goods. The fear of such counterfeits was instrumental in restraining the use of tabnu for a long time among the people, and restricted the buying and selling in markets to exchange in natural products or manufactured objects. We must perhaps agree with Lenormant in his conclusion that the only kind of national metal of exchange in use in Egypt was a copper wire or plate, this being the sign invariably used in the hieroglyphics in writing the word tabnu. The present rural population of Egypt scarcely ever live in isolated and scattered farms: they are almost all concentrated in hamlets and villages of considerable extent, divided into quarters often at some distance from each other. The same state of things existed in ancient times, and those who would realize what a village in the past was like, have only to visit any one of the modern market towns scattered at intervals along the valley of the Nile: half a dozen fairly built houses, inhabited by the principal people of the place, groups of brick or clay cottages thatched with dura stalks, so low that a man standing upright almost touches the roof with his head, courtyards filled with tall circular mud built sheds, in which the corn and dura for the household is carefully stored, and wherever we turn, pigeons, ducks, geese, and animals, all living higgledy-piggledy with the family. The majority of the peasantry were of the lower class, but they were not everywhere subjected to the same degree of servitude. The slaves, properly so called, came from other countries: they had been bought from foreign merchants, or they had been seized in a raid and had lost their liberty by the fortune of war. Their master removed them from place to place, sold them, used them as he pleased, pursued them if they succeeded in escaping, and had the right of recapturing them as soon as he received information of their whereabouts. They worked for him under his overseer's orders, receiving no regular wages, and with no hope of recovering their liberty. Many chose concubines from their own class, or intermarried with the natives and had families: at the end of 2 or 3 generations their descendants became assimilated with the indigenous race, and were neither more nor less than actual serfs attached to the soil, who were made over or exchanged with it. The landed proprietors, lords, kings, or gods, accommodated this population either in the outbuildings belonging to their residences, or in villages built for the purpose, where everything belonged to them, both houses and people. The condition of the free agricultural labourer was in many respects analogous to that of the modern fellah. Some of them possessed no other property than a mud cabin, just large enough for a man and his wife, and hired themselves out by the day or the year as farm servants. Others were emboldened to lease land from the lord or from a soldier in the neighbourhood. The most fortunate acquired some domain of which they were supposed to receive only the product, the freehold of the property remaining primarily in the hands of the Pharaoh, and secondarily in that of lay or religious feudatories who held it of the sovereign. They could, moreover, bequeath, give, or sell these lands and buy fresh ones without any opposition. They paid, besides the capitation tax, a ground rent proportionate to the extent of their property, and to the kind of land of which it consisted. End of Project Gutenberg Professor Heather and For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.